It's great to be back and to have such a wonderful person to present who is an actual Michigan native. We like that. One of our own. I have a few notes, though. Scott is truly an explorer, and I was thinking about him today and thinking, what is there to say about Scott? And I thought, you know, he kind of reminds me of Thoreau. Henry David Thoreau and his Walden project, because Scott is from Detroit. He was actually born in Redford and grew up in the greater Detroit area, but he has always worked in and around Detroit, and his work is reflective of the place that he is from. His work uses found objects, looks at memory and decay, though I say he is not like so many of the helicopter artists that come into Detroit from faraway places and create what we call ruin porn. Scott's work is far from that, and he doesn't like things to be wasted, he says. So that's one way of sort of reconvening the objects of decay within the city he finds within his work. His artwork is exhibited in many locations nationally. It is at the DIA, the Cranbrook Art Museum, the University of Michigan, Smart Museum of Art and Contemporary Art Museum, St. Louis, and the Kunst-Werke Institute, and Van Abbemuseum, and the Kunsthalle Wien. He recently completed projects at Sculpture Space in New York and Bundanon, is that what it is? Okay. Trust of Australia, and it has exhibited at the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts Museum in Philadelphia and was awarded a Kresge Artist Fellowship, well-deserved. And he's also represented locally here in Michigan by the Suzanne Hilbury Gallery, and I think you have a show coming up in November there.
Yeah, I have a show in November at Hilbury.
Wonderful. So we'll all be there. Other key items of importance that I think are important to know about Scott before he starts. He's left-handed. He's a 6 of spades. His childhood nickname was Scooter. And he may have the blood of Spanish soldiers. Here's Scott.
So the first image is ruin porn, of course. Yeah, nice to see you all here tonight. I kind of ramble in these lectures. I don't quite know what I'm going to say or miss from the last time I talked, but it's generally a chronological order of what I've been doing since I decided to become an artist. And it starts with Detroit. It starts with Redford. I was kind of recently I became aware of two things about myself, and one is that when I was a kid, my father was a mechanic. He was kind of a gearhead. And one of my earliest memories is of being in a car, looking out the window at the overpasses on a freeway, and knowing that we were on our way to the junkyard by the color of the overpass. And, you know, later in life, you start to realize, wow, I'm really working with a lot of junk. And I think it's because it started at a really early age. And then the other thing I think that is really clear is that I've been exploring since I was really young. I've been always interested in finding places that were hidden, or maybe in areas where you might not notice that there's so much hidden beauty. Somehow you overlook it, maybe you're too used to it. So Detroit, of course, is one of these places where it's just filled with desolate areas that people don't go to anymore, areas that when you grow up in the kind of white trash buffer zone of Redford Township between the Detroit perimeter and the more affluent suburbs, that it's kind of, those places are talked about with disdain, with disgust, and how it needs to be torn down, or the city is so terrible. So I started to rebel against that. I started to rebel against all the generations before me that had such nostalgia for Detroit and such sadness for what it used to be and what it is now, and they looked on the decay and thought of it as a bad thing. And I think I heard that so much, it was pounded into me so much as a kid that I started to feel like, wait a minute, why is it always looked at as such a negative thing? So these first images are really early photos I took in the mid-90s, before I really took photos. This is more the period where I was going into places like this in Detroit, and instead of seeing them as devastation or or ugly or disgusting. I saw them as potential. I saw them as material I could use and wasted material. If anything, if I was irritated with anything, it was with the people who let this happen and how they let things go to waste. And I just wanted to use what had been wasted, like Christina already said. So these are the places I first started to explore. I started taking objects out of these places and making sculptures with them. I'm not even going to show you any of those sculptures because it was so long ago. And at some point I started to think less about making individual objects, and I started thinking more about, yeah, here's a good example. This is going to come up a lot, the kind of cryptic texts that I like about when the words become obsolete. What it used to mean doesn't mean the same thing anymore. But I was taking objects out of these places and making sculptures. Some of the places where nature has completely reclaimed a space, those places were really beautiful to me. I was captured by the transition that was happening. I think there's always beauty in transition. And sometimes I think people don't like transition when the transition is from life to death. There's some kind of fear of death that comes up, the connection to mortality. We don't like to be reminded of that. But me personally, I don't mind it. I think it's quite beautiful to see how nature comes back. And I don't see it necessarily as a bad or good thing. I just see it as a natural cycle. And the same way nature and the seasons change, cities can be really amazing, giant, powerful cities, and then cities can also die and then be reborn. And that's been happening since the dawn of man. So one of the things I feel like I say over and over again about Detroit is that people seem to be really focused on the last 100, 150 years. And yet there have been people living on that little spot on the river for thousands of years. So it's a long view versus a short view. This is a good transition. So here's what I was doing, taking photos of these places, but also taking objects out of these places and creating objects, sculptures. But eventually I started to want to make installations. And the first big installation I did was at the DIA. You can see that's the grill of that same car. So a partner of mine, a collaborator named Clinton Snyder, and I decided to do this installation that was made up of about 400 of these boxes, and each box represented objects found from the city of Detroit, like the history of Detroit through objects. And it was a pretty big installation. We had to design the room, and it was for the 300th anniversary of Detroit. So it was like the history of Detroit through objects, commemorating the 300 years since we've been here as Europeans. The sculptures in the middle are sculptures I make. They're cast sculptures, and they're made from sewer grates. And it was a lot of fun. And over the years, it's been reconfigured many times. This is in a different location at Marygrove College. This is in Windsor. And this is where I started to really start to get a little crazier. I extracted a boat from a vacant lot in Detroit and put it in the gallery. It's still coming out of a box, but it's a 22-foot boat. And then you can see this is where it came from. I like how the tree was kind of growing through it, and then here you've got the column going through it. And that kind of transitions into another photo series that I've been doing over at least 10 years now, maybe 15, of photographing abandoned boats in Detroit. This is like an old canal that leads from the Detroit River into the canal neighborhoods on the east side. There's a preponderance of dumping in Detroit for obvious reasons. You can find vacant lots, you can find dead-end streets, you can find areas where you can dump things that cost too much money to pay for to be dumped. So a lot of times that's tires, and you'll see later that tires come up. But sometimes it's boats, and there's something really poetic to me about a city that's built on the river that really was built because of the river and suddenly became known for the automobile. And now the river is less important, but now the automobile industry is left as well, and you've got abandoned boats on abandoned streets. There's kind of a bigger overarching theme of this series of photos too, which is kind of forlorn vessels, or maybe even the idea of being shipwrecked in a place like Detroit, this kind of mysterious land that you'll discover. But there's certainly a ton of boats. And this series never ends. It'll end when this kind of thing stops, but it doesn't really stop. So even jet skis. Somebody from Europe saw this series, and you can see the little boat up there next to that house. And they said something to me about how they liked my pleasure boat series. And I never thought of it that way before, but then I thought, yeah, these are luxury items. Who has a boat? Someone who can afford a boat. Someone who can afford a speedboat. I love this one. Freestyle. Got a nice American eagle on the back. So you can see I've got a ton of these photos. But even just these kind of forlorn objects where you've got, this is a place where these blues festivals happen every Sunday in the summertime in this vacant lot. There's a blues jam session. But when there's that's not happening, you just see this kind of obscure toilet sitting in the middle of a lot. And huge, huge boats will be dumped. Another thing I did really early on was because I was going in a lot of these places, these abandoned buildings and vacant neighborhoods, I was running into a lot of guys who make their living by scrapping metal, or really scrapping anything they can, bricks, pallets, anything that can be resold. And there was a certain kinship that happened because we're doing the same thing, but we're looking for different things. So we weren't competing, but we were both doing something illegal, and I got to know a lot of them. And then I did a series of photos of them. That's the angel prophet Eli Wheeler. These guys would go, they'd live at this old silo and they'd burn their copper wire inside the silo, burn the plastic off the copper wire. This guy was Jay. He would take his cart and sell stuff to the scrapyard and then come around the scrapyard and sneak in through the smiley face hole, take the stuff out of the scrapyard and go and resell it again. And then this place realized that was happening and put up a big sign on the back of their wall. This is the roof of the Lee Plaza, which was a high-rise on the Grand Boulevard in Detroit, where the interior of the peaks has been scrapped of copper. You can see the copper on the higher peaks there, but now that even that copper is gone. When copper prices got really high, this is also something I learned from the scrappers, that the price of semi-precious metals is directly related to wartime. So if we're doing military activities, suddenly the need for metals, the prices go up. So when scrapping got really crazy, it was right around the time Iraq and Afghanistan were really happening. And the prices got so outrageous that people were risking their lives to get the copper off these peaks that are like 14 stories above the ground. And they did it. It's inside the train station. You can see the trail of scrapping. And here's a guy named Country Boy burning the copper wire to get the plastic off, which of course is really toxic and terrible. But this guy, he's been walking around my neighborhood for 15 years, and he's still alive. And it seems like there's a mental mind over matter thing that happens when you're in a survival mode, whereas maybe you or I would gag at the smell of this and get sick. He's just trying to survive, and it doesn't seem to bother him. Here's a guy scrapping on Devil's Night, a 20-foot piece of aluminum. And then I made an installation where I bought the copper off of Country Boy that was 200 pounds of copper, and that's the equivalent of how much caramel corn you can buy with that much money you'd get from that much copper, which he ate at the gas station across the street from me, and he liked to get caramel corn. Segue into another series based on basically dumping tires. The reason tires are dumped all around the city is because it costs $2 per tire to recycle a tire. So no one wants to pay that money, and it's a lot easier for people to have a tire shop in the suburbs, get a ton of tires changed in, and then in the middle of the night drive a truck into the city in some vacant lot and dump all the tires. This is a former trailer park next to City Airport, and there were thousands of tires in here. This is just the neighborhood across the street, not so far away. Again, this mountain of tires. Look, that's a 20-foot box truck. Just everywhere. And these tires have diminished. These kinds of tire piles in Detroit have diminished. But it was really quite crazy. This is around 2006. And then, of course, the beauty of working like this is I'm the only one who's gathering tires. Everybody else is dumping tires. So when the cops see me, they think I'm dumping tires. Why would I be gathering tires? And it just became a big mess of trying to get them to convince them that I'm really gathering tires. And then I brought them out to this very wealthy neighborhood of West Bloomfield. And for the first MoCAD fundraiser, before MoCAD opened in Detroit, the Museum of Contemporary Art Detroit, I built a tire pyramid. I love this guy in the corner. I wish I had a laser pointer to point at him. He's wearing a nice blue vest. He's got his little dog. One of the great differences in Detroit and this neighborhood was when I'd gather the tires in Detroit, guys would come up to me and go, "Hey man, you got to let me in on your secret. I know you know how to make money from taking tires now." Like they knew I figured out some way to get money. But in the suburbs, they were more like, "Oh, wow, this is really great piece. How long is it going to be here?" As in, can we get it to go away? The guy across the street drove up and talked to me on his golf cart one day. There's a big difference. And then there's a nice little squirrel over here. And then I did take it away. The deal was that if I was going to do this piece, that the Museum of Contemporary Art board members had to pay for them to be recycled. So there were 2,109 tires, which is about $4,200. And they agreed. And I was so pleased with the lawn being ruined, but of course they probably resodded it in the next couple days. And then the tires were picked up by a company in Detroit that was supposed to shred them. That was in 2006. We took them there, and the guy said, our shredder's broken. And I swear I can drive on Grand River and still see my pile of tires in this vacant lot. So I need to go in there and get more photos of the final piece. Really, I just moved them around the city. Really kind of a switch-aroo, but maybe a great way to talk about how I just want to be able to manifest artwork in whatever medium seems right for the idea I have, is this series. It's an installation based on how much I was irritated with the public art at the time, which was all cows being painted in cities, and mooses in Toronto, and bears in Berlin, and everywhere you went, people were painting fiberglass animals. And it bothered me because it was about the closest we were getting to public art at the time in America. And what's happening? I definitely screwed up. Don't make fun of animals. Oh, I found it. Okay. Everything's good? Okay, speed round. Someone's going to have a seizure. Okay, so basically I tried to do the same thing that they do in these shows. I tried to have my friends propose ideas of how the animals would be painted, and then I wanted it to be very PC, like Happy Sunshine, animals painted like Elvis type stuff. But then I wanted to alter the animals in ways that were true to the way the animals actually might be existing in the world today. So the shark is finned. The pig is being drained into a blood barrel. The polar bear is drowning, things like that. But they're still painted in happy, wonderful ways. The cow was the weirdest one because I didn't want to do just a typical cow sliced up into beef. So I did research about cows and found that they get mutilated. Farmers find cows mutilated. So that's the cow mutilated by aliens, painted like the globe. There's a disco ball raccoon. Any animal that would be trapped for its fur was put in a trap. And that disco ball totally worked. It was operational. There's the bear that got caught in a trap that gnawed off its leg. There's the gorilla that's cut up for bushmeat. They poach them in Africa, painted like grape ape. There's the polar bear, painted like Ursa Major, Ursa Minor. The chimpanzee painted like SpongeBob, hooked up to some kind of monitor. The buffalo that shows the ratio between arrows to bullets. And there's the shark again. This is the crazy one. A lot of them were these taxidermy forms, and if you don't know about taxidermy forms, hunters will, if they want to get a kill taxidermied, you can buy these forms for each animal that are shaped in a certain way. And this form is if you kill a deer and it has a baby fetus inside, and you want to get the fetus taxidermied. So there's the unborn deer fetus painted like sunshine and clouds, rainbows. Now switch it up a little bit. Again, another real interest of mine is ancient history. So here we've got an old map of Detroit showing some of the earthworks along southwest Detroit's border. The little peninsula you see there where it says River Rouge is now Zug Island. That's where the Ford shortcut canal was made so he could get his freighters up. But you can see there's a lot of earthworks there. They call it the Great Mound, the Circular Mound. That's an image of the Great Mound. And this is what it looks like where the Great Mound was. So one of the interesting things to me is how we seem to forget the long history we have in these places. I was never taught about the native history of Detroit. And yet, if you look at it, it's pretty amazing that the transition we've gone through. Now it's a brownfield. It's like a toxic brownfield where Solvay Process used to be, which was a coke company, coal. These are just images of areas that used to be mound site areas, and what they are now. In some cases, it's, you know, parks where fishermen are. In some cases, it's neighborhoods. I know, I don't know if I'd like to live in that house, but maybe, I don't think they're making any money from that billboard. This is the old Doré Velodrome, which is a bike track made in the late 60s for bicyclists, but went into disrepair pretty quickly. By the 80s, I'm pretty sure it was quite abandoned. But it's on Mound Road, and Mound Road is named after a mound. But where's the mound? We don't quite know. Here's a guy who lives in southwest Detroit, riding around on his ATV. You would never guess that's Detroit. This is a part of the Rouge River, where, again, you would never know this is Detroit, but this is in someone's backyard. Here's a big mound along the river. And then I made my own midden mound, and a midden mound is basically a trash heap. When they uncover midden mounds, they find their shells or oysters from the scraps or just whatever garbage ancient people threw away. They made mounds of those. So this is my mound, which is basically made out of all the junk in my studio. Nobody bought it. I had to take it back home. Transition into another grouping of photos I've been documenting over about 10 years, or probably since the late 90s. I always forget what year it is. It's already past that. But this is a neighborhood east of Hamtramck, which has been very decimated over the time that I've been photographing it. It's called the I-94 Industrial Park Renaissance Zone. Renaissance zones in the city are basically you can buy the property and not have to pay taxes for an extremely long period of time. But the problem is the city really wanted this whole swath of land to be bought up for like a mixed-use giant industrial facility. Never happened. They really made an effort too. They tore down trees, they took down the houses. People who were living there eventually, I think their houses got condemned until there was nothing left. So now all the streets are blocked off with concrete barriers. And part of the reason they're blocked with concrete barriers is because once this process started, like you saw in earlier photos, everybody just thought this is the perfect place to dump trash. So how do we prevent that? Concrete barriers. It doesn't really work, but it's the attempt. Instead, if you look at this kind of topography from this photo, and I'm standing on a school, which was the last structure in this neighborhood, and that school's also gone now, but I'm on the roof of it for this photo. But look at the topography. It's probably it's accidentally one of the most naturally topographic areas of the city because of all the mounds of fill dirt and debris from tearing down houses and tearing down trees. And it's completely overgrown, and animals have come back. There's the school, the Cooper School, which is now gone. Milkweeds blooming. I mean, there's a lot of kind of beautiful natural activities that are happening now. Rabbits, foxes, pheasants. If you haven't seen the pheasants in Detroit, there's so many pheasants around Detroit because they live in these areas where the grass grows as high as it can. And they're so hardy that they've exported Detroit pheasants. They've used them to repopulate areas where pheasants are waning. Yeah, you can just see, like, it's a great big expanse. One of the projects I wanted to do in this neighborhood was, and I haven't quite done it, and it's still kind of on the docket in my head, was I wanted to create crop circles. But I wanted to do the crop circles with a lawnmower, so they'd be lot circles. The reason that the city of Detroit doesn't usually cut this area, well, they do, you can see it stops. Like, they'll go that far in, and they'll stop. It's just because there's too much chance they're going to run over something horrible, like an engine block or something. You know, they don't want to risk it with their tractors. So they cut about that much, and then leave the rest. This is a series that probably is the first one that's going to connect to the work that's in the show at the UICA. The work in this show, if you haven't seen it already, is kind of a conglomerate of pieces and installations I've done in cast concrete structures throughout Detroit. And a lot of the buildings I end up working in are these old Albert Kahn structures that are related to the auto industry. I don't really do it specifically for that reason, but there are certain ones that are iconic, that are vacant, that are filled with things that I feel like are quite impressive and maybe even intimidating to work in. And when you get an idea and you want to do it, I feel like there's also that feeling of urgency because things change really quickly. So this is the first one where I felt like I'm going to take on this building, even though it's a lot. I'd seen people try and work in this building before, and it just was a failure every time. So until this point, I hadn't had the guts to work inside. But basically I had an idea that I would use the materials on site to build a sculpture instead of taking things away. So part of the process is I'm in there at night. I'm in there whenever I can, whenever I have time to get in there. And working in the winter, I mean, it's cold as hell, but it's quite nice to work in the winter in these places because it's desolate and you get a lot of peace. One of the factors that I feel like at some point I have to mention is that these places I work in are like a place of solace for me. They're like my churches. I go there for to be alone, to meditate. They're quiet. They're the closest I can get to nature sometimes in Detroit. They're like my walk in the woods. And you'd be surprised how they give that feeling. I think a lot of people assume that they're going to be scary or that they're going to run into dangerous people or something. And for me, I like especially working in the winter when there's so much silence, or when you do hear something, it's water melting and it sounds like a babbling brook or something, or birds flying by. It's really quite peaceful. So I decided to use the wooden blocks that line the floors of these buildings. Most of the concrete buildings had some kind of wood along the floor. You can see not just wood, in this case a lot of asbestos too. But the wooden blocks, they're kind of floor blocks, and they're made out of pine. And what they would do is they would line a whole floor with that, and it would be a shock absorption and probably a little bit of absorbing sound and oil and whatever things dripped too, but mainly for the heavy-duty machinery that would be functioning on top of these floors. And I just started to gather them like a slave building the pyramids. I had buckets, and I would go to other parts of the building, fill them up, carry them over. I didn't want to remove anything from the scene of the photo. And I started to build this pyramid. And the pyramid is made out of 201 blocks. And the reason there's the one is because I had to put one little one on top. And I figured out later how many there were just by adding it up and multiplying it. And it took me 8 months. And 8 months, not every day. In fact, there was a period where I was taking it, I was out of town for a month and a half, and when I came back, everything had thawed and shifted, and I had to kind of start working again. But one of the most remarkable things about this project was that over the course of 8 months, that's a lot of time for people to destroy what you're working on, for a lot of variables. And there's a lot of things that happened with this project for me. I was doing a project that I had no control over. I had no control over the building being boarded up, torn down, renovated, burned, cleaned out. I had no idea if people were going to come in and destroy it or add to it or spray paint it. There were scrappers working concurrently with me, taking down pipes. So you see in this photo there aren't any pipes. But if you look at the earlier photos, well, that might be the only one. You can see it. There's pipes running right down the middle of the ceiling there. You can barely see it. Big galvanized pipes. When the scrappers came and took that galvanized pipe down, it didn't even touch the pyramid. And so I would earn the respect of the scrappers, and I felt really great about that. Like they liked that I was in there working. And these are the same guys who, when I was in there one day and they had their gas-powered saws cutting down this pipe, it all went silent, and they were all telling each other to be quiet. And I said, "What's going on?" And they said, "The city is fencing the building right now." So we were in the building, and they had their trucks in the building, and the city was re-fencing the whole place. So I left. And when I came back the next day, the scrappers had not only left and gotten away, but they took the fence. That's why they weren't scared. Yeah, so you can see a really up-close view of the bricks here, but they're also soaked in creosote, which is a really toxic material. It's made from, it's like a coal tar derivative, the way they would preserve railroad ties and old telephone poles. So it was nasty working in there, and like a lot of my projects, I probably should be a little bit more cautious with my health. But in this case, I was not very smart, but yeah, it ended up okay. The pyramid also ended, the project ended, when I took that photo in September of '08, and then less than a month later, the Environmental Protection Agency cleaned out the whole building. And so it was like a real feeling of timing, how when you get an idea, if you don't do it, when you feel like you should do it, you could miss your chance. I couldn't do that project now if I wanted to. Then I went to China, of course. What would anybody else do? I went to China. And I somehow got lucky to work in one of the very few abandoned buildings in Shanghai. no floors. You can see me walking on beams. I built a little bamboo hut, and I built another pyramid. And then 2 weeks later, this building was torn down. And I did this on like the final day I was in China, and then I flew back to Detroit, and my friend called me or texted me or something and said, yeah, the building's already gone. And it was really risky, because I could have been in there when they decided to tear it down. Then I went to Florida and did a project about Ponce de Leon. Again, really no segues here. Who cares about segues? I was in it. I think that the bottom line is I just like to work site-specifically. So wherever I am, I get ideas based on the history, based on my environment, based on the people. And, you can see when I'm in Detroit, I seem to be doing very similar things in Detroit. But here I am in the scrub jungle of Florida, and it's a place that Ponce de Leon was trying to find the Fountain of Youth, and a lot of things are named after him. And I thought I would put my own little magic Fountain of Youth in the middle of the jungle that people could discover. It's the Fountain of Youth vending machine. If you have 2 quarters, if you discover the Fountain of Youth vending machine in the jungle and you have 2 quarters, you can get some elixir of life. Part of this was based on I think it was a Japanese scientist had a theory that water molecules will change based on words. And his whole theory was based on studying, is there a difference between holy water and normal water? And he did research, microscopic, imagery of the water crystals changing when they were blessed. And that also led to, the idea of, well, why don't we write things on water bottles? Like if you wrote something evil on water, would it change it? If you wrote something good on water, would it change it? So that led me to think, well, why wouldn't anybody put eternal life or something? Like, finally, the elixir of life on water. And I have no idea what's happened to this piece. I just built it, took the photos, and left it. There's a pretty good chance that somebody had clubbed it open and took all the water home. I think that's a nice transition visually, even though it has nothing to do with it, but we're going to go right from Florida back to Detroit. This is the roof of the Roosevelt warehouse. And the Roosevelt warehouse is also heavily represented in the series of work out in the hallway. Again, the way nature takes over. You can see this is the train station right next to the building. It's the famous abandoned Detroit train station. These 2 buildings are intimately connected through history. This was originally a post office, the post office. And there's an underground conveyor system from this building to the train station where the mail would be shipped by train. And so for a long time, that's what it functioned as, and you can still see remnants of that, but then much later, it became a Detroit Public Schools warehouse. And everything you could imagine from the Detroit Public Schools was in this warehouse, as you can see from this image. This floor majority of it is books and papers and tests and things like that. But a lot of other floors had things you'd find for gym class, everything right down to American flags, everything that a public school would have. And over the years of it being abandoned, it's been trashed. It caught on fire multiple times. I think it actually became abandoned after a fire. And yeah, you've got people going through, taking things. I mean, really, the majority of damage that happens to these buildings is from young kids who just want to screw shit up, who just want to break things. And that happens pretty quickly. The scrappers will take what they want, but they're not the ones throwing things out the window to make loud noises. So it's a combo of scrappers breaking in, taking what they want, and kids really just wanting to screw things up. You can see in this case, it's a group of kids who come into the building specifically to go into the frozen, flooded basement in the winter and play hockey. And actually, this building, you may have heard a story a few years back of a dead body being found in the ice in a building in Detroit, and that was this day, photographing these hockey players, I found that body. And I was really irritated with that story because it was so sensationalized idea of Detroit. It's not at all what really happened. But it was still pretty... Every time I see this photo, I think of that day. It was kind of a traumatic day for everybody involved. This is the old chute where the mail used to go down. So, again, it's a building I've been thinking about working in for years, and I was going to work on the ice, but after the body was found, the building was completely sealed up. So it was super hard to get into. So the only way in was through that underground conveyor belt, which was 300 feet long, and you have to do like a funky crab walk to get in. And this is what you find when you get in. That's the basement in the summertime. It's hard to even tell, but it's quite flooded and not water that you want to fall into. So you have to weasel your way up this little chute onto the ground floors. There's quite a variety of different plant life. I eat those mushrooms all the time, completely fine. They're really delicious. These ones too. The one thing about this space too is that because the books had all burned, it turned into almost like a soil. So the plant life really started to grow in there. And this is what ended up happening. I started to extract and do a pseudo-archaeological dig on the building based on my many years of going in there. And these are all objects which I knew were in there. After taking them out, I started to kind of organize them the way I imagine archaeologists would organize things that they find from ancient times, there's a part of me that's making fun of that because, I really wonder how accurate we could possibly be when we discover things from ancient times, and how accurate will they be when they're trying to decipher us, our language, our objects, what we use them for. And there's such a wide range of screw-ups that are possible. Like, can they possibly get sarcasm or, colloquial expressions and things when they're discovering and deciphering language? So I feel like it's the same way. And these are all stalagmites taken out of the Roosevelt warehouse. So a lot of these stalagmites, probably all of them, are on display on the shelves out there in the hallway. And in the center, that's a pile of orange plastic cones, like street cones, melted and then covered in a stalagmite. On the far right, that's a 3-ring bookbinder covered in stalagmite. How could you possibly know what that is? This is piles of containers of glitter. If you have glitter containers, so they're coming in packages for some kind of art class for elementary school, but it's metal. Glitter is metal. So when it burns, it welds itself together. You get these strange shapes. And then on the left, these are mnemonic toys. So mnemonic toys. You've got these little plastic objects, and then you've got cue cards that go with them so you can learn words. So a guitar would have a guitar cue card with it. But they've been melted together, and now they look like friezes. They look like some kind of architectural work. I love these ones. I call them land mammals of the savanna and subarctic. Just melted toys, again. This thing in the center there is a stack of red binders that's been melted together. But of course, it looks very visceral. And those are plastic bowling pins on the left, which are also in the show. And one of my favorites is that blob on the right. It's a pile of melted plastic jump ropes that has now been covered in stalagmite. Those are drinking straws. I mean, how cryptic is that? The new book of knowledge. But you open it and it's like kind of a horrible English book. There's the red binders. Fertility dolls. I decided these were fertility dolls. I mean, anything I think could be maybe it's ceremonial. We don't know. There's one of the friezes. And I built this cauldron out of books. This is what I wanted to build in the building, on the ice. And then when the ice thawed, it would just disappear. But I love that these books are titled Discoveries. I'm going to switch it up again. I know, again, bad segues, but this is another kind of earthwork project I did in St. Louis. This is a map of St. Louis in 1801. Those are all Native American earthworks. Way down at the bottom where that kind of U-shaped, diamond-shaped wall is, that's where the arch is now. So I went back to all these sites. This is one mound that's still left, but the rest of them, I decided these are the new mounds. This is where they were, and this is the new mound. Vess is like their Fago. That truck is a new mound. Then I went into one of the buildings. There's an abandoned building where some mounds were, and I found that the building was a former toxic waste transfer station. I really picked the greatest places to work, really healthy. And these are all used rubber gloves for the toxic waste transfer station. So I made a mound. I made a midden mound of rubber gloves. There's a view of the freeway from the roof. I also used 55-gallon drums to make another pyramid. I like to make pyramids, turns out. And then, of course, once I started working in there, the city came in close to the building, which is exactly what happened when I was building the tire pyramid, too. After all the years of people dumping tires in the vacant airport next to the city airport, the vacant trailer park next to the city airport, they finally put concrete barriers down so you couldn't drive in there anymore because I'd been taking so many tires out. They saw my truck, and they were like, we have to stop this, to stop this truck from going in. I was cleaning up the site, though. This is another mound site where a former mound was. It's an old train depot. I built a little stone circle inside, and then from the roof, you can see this is a tent village on the Mississippi River, and it's called Hopeville. It's gone now, but it existed for quite a long time in St. Louis, pretty independent of anything. Someone had come along and given them all these blue tarps. And I decided that, across the Mississippi River is a very, very ancient site called Cahokia. And Cahokia is the most well-preserved and largest earthwork site in North America. The largest mound in Cahokia is the same size or bigger than the base of the Great Pyramid of Egypt. And no one really knows about it. But it's been well-preserved. It's in East St. Louis, which is a really rough part of town. And this St. Louis used to be kind of the suburbs of Cahokia. And so I decided that this building I was on was going to be named after the same mound. Monk's Mound is the big mound at Cahokia. So this is Monk's Mound West. And I decided that this is the new Mississippians, and they can claim the new Monk's Mound as their mound. And I put a tent on the roof for the king or whatever, the head of the tribe to claim. And again, I did artifacts. So here's artifacts taken from the sites. I decided that was some kind of celestial dial, even though it's just a foundry form. These cryptic name tags, God knows what they mean. A timepiece. This is a petrified spray paint can. Canine bones. A sun god. And back to Detroit. So as I was saying earlier, a lot of times young people like to destroy things in Detroit. And one of the things that has happened is with the old Packard plant, which used to be filled with a lot of cars and boats, that this certain group of people have done a really good job of pushing stuff out the window. In this case, they tried to push the dump truck out the window, and it made it halfway, and then they had to come back later with hydraulic jacks to get it fully out. And I thought, man, that's a lot of effort. To really come over a period of months and really get it to fall out. But it's a good segue into my project I did there. The Packard plant is a huge, huge facility, multiple buildings, not all one building, but they're attached. And this structure is probably one of the earliest. It's where Albert Kahn really pioneered the use of reinforced cast concrete. He kind of took what had already been going on in Germany and made it so it was with the rebar inside, and where the rebar and the columns connected the horizontal floors, it was more structurally sound. It could withstand some flexibility, more strength, and it made it so you could open up the spaces more. And so in this place that is kind of like the birth of the cast concrete use in the auto industry in Detroit is now on the verge of just crumbling on its own. And this particular area I decided to work in is the southwest corner of the building. On the top of the building, the roof has been collapsing over many years, and I've been watching it collapse. It used to be just a little moon-shaped hole, but it's slowly been collapsing. I guess, from what I understand, the reason that this is like the one problem with reinforced cast concrete is that when water does get inside, the rebar, the iron bars inside start to rust and expand and contract, and eventually that leads to its demise. So that's what's happened here. But I loved how the columns were left standing. And I decided that these columns should be pedestals and something should be on them. And in the spirit of the way I've been working now, in another part of the building, there were all these old television sets. The building was used as like a storage space. Most abandoned buildings, if they're a big warehouse, their last gasp is as a storage facility. So there were TVs down on the ground floor in another part of the building, and I started hauling them up and placing them on columns, and I decided this is the new pantheon of the gods. So that's Hephaestus in the foreground, Aphrodite, Ares, the classical Greek gods. And I documented them over the course of a couple seasons as people destroyed them, as nature destroyed them. But they lasted quite a while. There were a few that lasted the longest, and I think it's because even the people who wanted to destroy them, at the same time, they wanted at least one to kind of pose in front of and be like, get a photo of themselves in front of the TV. That's not supposed to be in there. That's just an explosion. So this one's Zeus, all by himself. I don't know what I'm doing wrong here. And you can see they're kind of going to disappear over time. So here's Zeus from the roof. Here's him underneath. Again, you can see the city in the background, him underneath. And then while I was working in there, a lot of people started to come and want to get tours of it, and I'd be in shows, and people wanted to come and interview me there. And then I think it was March of 2010. Yeah, March of 2010, I was in a show in Vienna, and this Viennese TV crew came to Detroit, and they interviewed me, and then 2 weeks later, this happened, right where we were. So this is what it looked like after. I mean, that's like a 4-story collapse. I had pictures, images in my head of, the headlines in Europe. Detroit artist kills Viennese tourists. But again, to me, it's this kind of, this was such a beautiful day when I was there. It was such like a window to the city, like this majestic metropolis in the distance and this cliff. One of the other things that happens a lot in places like Detroit is that they reintroduce falcons, because falcons like to live on cliff sides. So peregrine falcons, which are virtually on the brink of extinction, have been brought back to places like Detroit where they can live. Now I'm going to move to another grim city, Utica, New York, which was built on the Erie Canal, and the Erie Canal is now a freeway in Utica. And it's really quite depressed there. There's no industry, there's no money, and this is a former powerhouse that I did a project inside of. You can see all the styrofoam. I decided that I was going to be Sisyphus. And the myth of Sisyphus is that he's doomed to damnation of pushing a boulder up a mountain only to have it roll back down again for eternity. Keep doing it over and over. So in this case, I decided to hoist the foam up to the top floor and build Sisyphus's stone. Again, I would get stuck in there at night sometimes, depending on if there were police outside. Most of what I do is illegal, it turns out. I'm not really trying to break any laws, but I'm trying to use what's been wasted. I'm trying to use spaces and find beauty in these spaces, but I'm still not getting permission, so I have to be careful. But the perks are that you get this kind of photo. So here's the stone, and then I had to try and make the stone float on its own. So I started to insert myself in a lot of these photo series as kind of like a narrative, a character. I'm Sisyphus, and there it's floating. Now here's where it gets weird. The stone's going to turn into a piece called The Voice of Space, which is based on a Magritte painting. Doesn't really make any sense, but it made sense to me. And the Magritte painting is kind of this big orb, this floating orb in the sky with a hole in it, which I guess is based on a big jingle bell. So in my narrative, Sisyphus creates the stone, which turns into the voice of space, which then realizes it's in Utica, gets depressed, commits suicide, and then Sisyphus has to build the stone again. Here, look, if you look up in the top window, there he is. He's about to roll out and die. From that stone, I'll go to a real stone in Australia. This is a kind of an interesting stone I found that I thought looked a lot like a head. And there were a lot of mystical things I found in this part of Australia. It was, suddenly I'm working in the bush. I go from working in the gritty city to working in the middle of nowhere in Australia. And it was great, but it was also a challenge. What am I going to use if I'm used to using found materials and I claim to work site-specifically and work that way? What am I going to do here? So I ended up getting lucky. I had a couple of ideas. One was based on the fact that this area was known as Haunted Point. And I remember I would want to know, and they'd always say to me, no one knows why. They don't know why it's called Haunted Point. It makes it really mysterious. But there was a river there where people had drowned, and there was a lot of kind of, apparently Aborigines had been hung during like the horrible times when Aborigines were persecuted, had been hung on this part of the ridge, and there seemed to be a lot of bad mojo. There's also a lot of wombats in Australia. I just want to put a wombat in here. But there'd be these great mysteries. So I find this rock cairn here on this ledge, in which someone has put to mark something, right? And it turns out there's this great cave underneath, but you have to kind of really risk some, you have to go over the edge to get in that cave. But it's nice. Here I am. Now I've decided, once again, I'm a character in the narrative. And the narrative is now going to be based on three things, mainly the history of this haunted point, and then also the paintings of Peter Bruegel. Bruegel would make these giant breaking wheels in a lot of his paintings, which are kind of medieval torture devices. They would strap someone to a wheel, break all their limbs, and put them on a post. And it's horrific, but yet the object itself is like this big lilting wooden flower that I always found really beautiful. And the guy who owned the property, the Australian artist who owned the property I was staying on, was really into Bruegel. And then the last thing was Don Quixote. I felt kind of like I was going to be Quixote in this thing and have they were like the windmills of Don Quixote. So here I am building. There's one in the middle there. You can kind of see it. The one problem I had with this piece was I didn't put anything to show scale. That's about 25 feet tall. That one's more like 30. You can see how tall it is there. Tried to make the wheels with string, vines, and sticks. So suddenly I'm working with nature in a way that I haven't really before. This was a great little area. There are these big lizards in Australia called goannas. They're monitor lizards. They get about 8 feet long. And when I went to put this piece up, he was sitting on the rock right there. And again, another thing in Australia is pretty much every animal can kill you. And another dumb Australian, and I freaking love Australia, but the way they would give me advice sometimes were hilarious. So I would say, what do I do to avoid being attacked? And they would say, don't corner him, mate. Don't corner him. Like, well, what animal could you corner that wouldn't, any animal you corner is going to be a bad idea, right? So don't corner him was not the best advice. But the thing about this goanna is that whereas a lot of other animals can injure you in pretty normal ways, like a spider can sting you and you die, the poisonous snake can bite you, the goanna bites you and you die from the infection. Long, slow, painful infection death. And also they said, don't stand still because they might think you're a tree and try and run up you. I'm like, all right. So basically I waited a couple of days and I went back. The other thing I did when I was in Australia was based on another artist who had found a horse in the desert and set it up. It had rigor mortis. He set it up for a photo that looks like he's trying to mount a horse. And you don't even notice in the photo the horse is dead until you really scan it. So I found these cow bones. And again, I put myself in the narrative of being the guy who's going to rebuild this horse, even though it was a cow, and try and ride it. So here I am taking the bones to the river, washing the bones in the river, putting myself in half naked, putting the horse together with string, and then trying to ride it. Yeah. And this is from the photo. So you can see the ribs. But if you look at first, you don't even notice there's ribs and a giant hole in the leg. But yeah, that's Sidney Nolan. So I ended up having a great time in Australia. And then I came back to Detroit. It was winter time. And these photos, again, relate to what's out there. But this is an old project that's turning into a current project. I'm currently working in the train station. But although I haven't been in there in many months, but the project started with photographing in there, photographing the floors, the sites, deciding where I might want to work, deciding what the material was I was going to work with. This is just the view of Southwest Detroit from the roof. That's one of the ground floor areas. Again, view towards the north. And these floors here, the walls used to be lined with marble. And so over the years of people trying to scrap the marble and also vandals just trying to break the marble, all the marble has been pried off the walls and most of it is in piles on the floor in like broken shards. There's the basement, which the water, you can see I illuminated with a flashlight, is tinted green. We don't know why. No one knows why. And this is just, me documenting. Most of these projects I'm trying to document the site because I know it's going to change. and I'm building a kind of cairn, similar to these stone cairns that you find all over the world, but more like an egg shape, and that's about as big as it is right now. I've only made it this far, and then I had to stop the project. One of the reasons I had to stop is because the engineers in the building told me that it was too heavy, and they were afraid it was going to crash through the floor. So I stopped. But here's where that becomes interesting. I've never been doing something like this legally before. So they basically found I was working in there, and through a liaison who's interested in the arts, I got permission. So now I've been working with permission in a building. It's a very strange feeling. More floors, just documenting a lot of it as it changes, because the building's going to be renovated. They've been clearing out all the asbestos, and I don't quite know what's going to happen, but they've been working in it since June of last year. So have I. I mean, I've been working it for more than that, but we both were in there like concurrently. There's a closer up view. It is pretty effing heavy. For some reason, there are a lot of bees hanging out on the train station, so I had to document this bee about to commit suicide. That's the Roosevelt warehouse, which is right next door, which I have to go underground to get into. That's the basement, an old safe, and a beautiful owl graffiti door. This is very recent stuff. This is Tartarus, an installation I did at the public pool in Detroit. As you can see, Tartarus is the space between Hades and chaos. Tartarus is the place that Sisyphus is doomed to. Tartarus is the place that Tantalus is doomed to. And Tantalus is where the word tantalizing comes from. Tantalus was doomed to be in a pool of water up to his neck. He'd try and drink it, the water would recede. And then there'd be low-hanging fruits above him. He'd try and grab the fruits, they'd move away. So I decided in this piece that the low-hanging fruits would be all the plastic bags and trees. I spent about 2 weeks in Detroit gathering plastic bags caught in fences, trees. I put some trees in there and I covered them, and then that's Tantalus in the middle in the little baby kid pool. That's, I think I decided that was Ixion. I was just basing these on different gods who were doomed to different things. But really, you know, the funny thing about this installation was that sometimes I do things just to shake it up. In this case, everybody knew I was having a show at this place. I didn't want to just do photos, and I really liked the idea of it being super crowded in there with garbage. And that there'd be all these people coming to see my installation, and they'd be forced to have, like, their heads touching garbage. And it worked. There were a lot of people packed in there. Some people really liked it, and other people did not. This is, again, no segue. No segue. If you can figure out what this means, you can tell me. But I'll tell you what it means to me. Another thing I've been interested in for a while, but then only in this last year decided to go full force into, is bad graffiti. And I just found out that I have a publishing deal with a book of bad graffiti that'll be ready for my show in November at Hillberry, and I'm totally thrilled about that. So I need to really get on getting this done. But basically, you'll get a glimpse of what I consider to be bad graffiti. First of all, bad means good to me in this case, like things that crack me up, things that are juvenile, things that are ridiculous, bad spelling, bad scrawling, cursive. For some reason, cursive just cracks me up. You know, grammatical errors, just stuff that... Yes, okay, good, all right. You get it. And I have to warn you, there are probably... I tried to eliminate some of the most vulgar ones because most of the time when you find a piece of graffiti with a face, somebody comes along and draws a penis in the mouth. So I eliminated most of those, but you'll see still some swear words coming up. Again, cursive? Should this be cursive? This is so laden with, I mean, there's so much going on in this one. Look at there's a penis on the end, there's boobs, there's a baby turtle, I think, I don't know. I don't know, again, I don't know. And I'll just be driving sometimes and see them and just stop in the middle of the road to try and get it. This is a really bad neighborhood. Apparently someone named Half Bake was hanging out in there. This is a really poor drawing of I think it's a small man walking a dog, giving the middle finger, saying the word ooze with a skull and crossbones. Dirty Ed? Who is Dirty Ed? Okay, all right. It has like a double meaning, right? There's a fridge. I love, gang graffiti can be bad because it's done by bad people who are doing bad things. But it can also be bad when they're trying to be tough, but it doesn't come off as tough. It comes off as, I don't know, like this. They look like they're into astrology. There is a swastika, but that's an ancient symbol, and they could be talking about that. Like the cobras. We're tough, we're the cobras. But, I mean, come on, that cobra looks adorable. It's a collaborative work. This is for Kathy. I love this one because it was a homeless guy lived in this garage, and he didn't want anyone to come in there. And I think it's totally effective. Not quite in the way he wanted, but I did not want to go in there. This one, I think it's funny because they clearly wanted to get rid of the graffiti, but just the death part. So it's Death Road, but yeah, let's get rid of the death. And then that kind of transitions into another photo series, which I also want to make in a book, which is kind of just these symbols around Detroit, which sometimes are disappearing. I started to see a lot of old hand-painted murals and things disappearing. And again, similar to the artifacts I gather, things which I think are kind of cryptic. They're kind of mysterious if you don't know what they are, but other cases they're pretty straightforward and they're images of things from a time past. But I'm calling the series Signs, Symbols, and Ciphers. This is a building someone painted like a Mondrian. Just the way it's decaying is just kind of amazing. And a lot of times they were probably at one time really beautiful, and now they're just disappearing. This one I think is really interesting because it just says Michigan's best up there. Or this one used to be Fairlane. It used to be Fairlane Transmissions or something. It just says Air now. I don't quite know. I don't know what series this belongs in. This is a car wash. I love the colors. And there's a real theme that comes up over and over again is relating Detroit to Africa. And so the two symbols, Detroit is always the Renaissance Center, and Africa is always the pyramids. So you've got Egypt, Detroit, and Mayor Dennis Archer. This was just uncovered. A building was torn down, and this was behind it. Kind of beautiful, preserved Fago sign. I mean, God knows how old this was, but it was the same thing. A building was torn down, and this is what was behind it. Mr. Iowa. He looks friendly. This one I always thought was really bizarre. I've been a little frightened by the doctors. This used to be a haunted house. You know, you'd go in the trailer for the haunted house. I love that one dog's yawning. He's totally bored. Pizza cannot be turned into Arabic. This used to be like a Detroit institution, Sydney Bog Chocolates, and now it's the Haunted Bus Ride 2 with a skeleton with blood shooting out of the head. The abandoned building with someone made these nice signs for it. An old church in my neighborhood. This was kind of a nice night. I went out on Christmas Eve and there was a new moon. And it was so clear, and I just took some photos. It was so still. And I loved how that circle in that house was kind of like the new moon. This used to be a great old blues club, jazz club, Bluebird Inn. Chrysler is a little sailboat, giant swan. That's the IROC. You guys don't know the IROC? Yeah, you don't need to know the IROC. This is an old strip club on Van Dyke. America. This has been painted over. I'm so happy I got this. The eyes. But these things are all disappearing, and I'm just trying to get them before they're gone. Because again, I feel like it's already becoming a little bit cryptic. Look at Jesus added in there. This is gone. That sign's been taken down. They scrapped it. Building America. And then there's some very hand-painted. I really liked. Again, it's not bad graffiti. You know, it doesn't fit in my bad graffiti category, so I have to put it somewhere else. But it's still handwritten. An old church. So I'll translate this for you. Don't dumb you under camera, $5,000 fine. So I think what they're saying is don't dump trash. And again, you know, people break in to steal the copper. So the way to keep people out is tell them there isn't any copper. I don't know if it works, but that's the idea. So the final few slides here, I'm sure I've exhausted the hell out of all of you, is just things I'm working on right now. And this is a series I just did at the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts in Philadelphia. And it's kind of the transition into the one we have here at the UICA. So it's the cast concrete and auto age. You've got photos from various series working in these abandoned factories and these sites in Detroit that are kind of cast concrete. And then on the tables are all the stalagmites. So these buildings they're really becoming man-made caves. And you see how quickly a stalagmite is formed when nature takes over and a place is left. And I feel like they're artifacts. They're the same way you would discover these things in a cave. I'm discovering them in buildings, and I'm basically cataloging them and taking them as specimens. A couple new pieces that I'm trying to get done. This is an old cast concrete column that used to hold a radar dish. And there were two of them at this park at the foot of a street in Detroit, where they used to have radar dishes that would triangulate a Nike missile that could be shot from Belle Isle. Now, the Nike missiles aren't there anymore, but I like that there's this history that's this kind of mysterious column is there. So I thought I would try and do my own version of the god Nike there, but this is a situation where I need permission if I want to do something big. It's quite a big piece. I'm also digging a hole in my friend Graham's backyard. Graham White and I have been doing this collaborative piece for about 2 years. We've just been digging a hole and doing different stuff with it, and we don't even know what we're doing yet. But at this particular moment when we took this photo, we had an inverted pyramid. The pyramid's now out. It's just a hole again. So yeah, that's something I've been working on. One of the things I want to try and do is I have a show in the fall that I'm centering around the idea of the end of the world, and part of it is the timing. My exhibition opens in November, and it will be open through the Mesoamerican long count calendar end date, which a lot of people are talking about as the Mayan calendar end date, and coinciding with all kinds of other cosmic activity. So I'm really fascinated with the different ideas of the way the world might end. Even last year, there was a preacher who had predicted 2 different dates, one in May and one in October. And he got a lot of press, and there were billboards all over Florida for that. I think I believe that, you know, every society, every culture, every native people, they all have their creation myths and their ending myths, and the way the world is destroyed, the way the world began. I'm really fascinated with that. I think that there's a part of me that thinks that we live in our own mythology. Well, I shouldn't say there's a part of me. I think we do live in our own mythology nowadays, the same way everyone always has. And you don't really see it when you're in it, the same way you can look back on the people in the past and talk about how they were different, or how could they have thought the world was flat or whatnot. So I like these kinds of things. I like playing with these kinds of things and observing and imagining how are we going to be viewed in the future, to the people in the future, depending on if there are people in the future. So I love this idea of the end of the world and playing with all the different concepts of it. There's an abandoned walk through the stories of the Bible theme park in Michigan. And I've been I'm currently in the process of trying to acquire these things. I don't even know what I want to do yet, but they're just laying there. Again, it's wasted material, loaded wasted material. And they're quite hilarious, but you know, we'll see. That's one of the things. And then on the opposite side of that coin, there's also, maybe some of you know, there's a vacant dinosaur park in the Irish Hills called Prehistoric Forest, I think. And there's a lot of decaying, covered in moss, falling apart, vandalized dinosaurs, including this giant sloth. I want to try and acquire those as well. I don't quite know what I'm going to do yet. I have some ideas, but I'm in the process. There's me riding a giant dodo. And then the theme again, the kind of end of the world theme. I have a lot of different photos and installations I want to do and drawings, but I've been acquiring all these old texts that have these maybe somewhat cryptic titles or embossed covers. This is French for the end of the world. And again, I'm not quite sure what I'm going to do with them, but I'm really buying a lot of books. I think I'm just buying them because I like them. And I think that kind of wraps it up. I mean, the Ouroboros, to me, it's all about the cycles of nature. I don't know if there's ever a beginning or an ending. That's why I might be so intrigued with the idea of the end of the world and the way that we've been always thinking there's going to be an end since the dawn of time. But yet I don't know. I mean, there could be an end. There could be a scientific end. There could be a change that happens similar to when we did go from thinking the world was flat to realizing it's not. I think I'm just really intrigued with nature and the cycles and life and finding beauty in those things. And yeah, that's it.